Um, so couple things. First of all, there's a handout that goes along with this. We're going to go through a bunch of different scenarios, a lot of numbers. So unless you really like writing fast, I'd advise have that handout and you can just kind of take notes on. And those are in the back, Jeff, if they need it. All right, so yeah, I'm basically going to look at a number of different scenarios with confinement feeding. I worked with Jeff and Morgan. Basically, they provided most of the scenarios in terms of the assumptions we're making, in terms of what kind of barn, the cost, how much bedding are we going to need, all those things. So if you have a problem with all that, you can yell at me, but in the end, we'll ask why they made some of those assumptions. That said, I did my best to provide a number of different scenarios. In other words, we're going to have a situation where the barn's $70,000, another where it's half that. We're going to look at, if bedding is this price, if bedding is 2/3 that, a number of different things like that. So that said, hopefully you'll find something that will work for you. All right, let me back up. So that said, I do want to go through what I call the base assumptions with you first, just so you know what we're using. I will modify those a little bit in some of the scenarios. So this is where we're starting. Then again, we will vary this a little bit from scenario to scenario. So let's start with the cost. There's a slide, basically what I call costs, another slide for logistic type things, like how many cows or calves are we going to have in the facility, that type of thing. So let's start with the cost. So, and this is going to be for a 30 cow operation or a 60 head backgrounding operation in terms of the size. So the barn cost $70,000. Let's start with cost sharing it, and I'll show you a scenario where we don't later on. Let's assume that we expect to have this in use for 30 years. And I purposely had the interest rate way lower than what you're going to find right now. And we can modify that later on. But in other words, if it doesn't look good at 4%, how's it going to look at 6 or 7 or 8%? Even worse, right? So that's why I did that, because bedding costs, we're going to start at $60 a ton. I know depending on what you're using, that might vary considerably. I'll drop that later on. That's where we're going to start. So in terms of the time that is going to be required to deal with the bedding on a per week basis, so this is not necessarily filling it the first time, but on an average week, about 45 minutes in terms. And again, I have cattle on pasture. I don't have a confinement operation, so these are kind of parameters given to me. I have no idea what it takes, but I was told about 45 minutes. Does that sound reasonable per week of tractor time or skid steer time? 45 minutes of other time kind of related to that. And then I had to assign something in terms of what's your labor worth, $18, and then the variable tractor cost. So that would be fuel, depreciation in terms of use depreciation, prorating repairs, all that sort of stuff, $8 or $15 an hour. In terms of what the manure is worth, I've got the chemical value, NP and K, and that's roughly where those are at right now. If we've done this a year and a half ago, they'd be almost double that, but that's what I used. And I will show a scenario where we bump that up by 50%. Now, one thing that we might not typically value the manure at is, so you've got the raw chemical value, NP and K, probably some sulfur, calcium, some other things, but you also have just the organic matter, right? It's hard to quantify. I have no idea. I saw no values on this, but I tried to guesstimate in my own mind what that might be worth. In other words, aside from the chemical value, on every ton that you haul out and spread is worth something. I put $4 a ton. Have no idea if that is in the ballpark, if it's less, but I just tried to give something that to me sounded reasonable. One thing that we're going to assume here is, especially for a small operation, and I will show you in the end a scenario that has all this, but I'm going to assume that, if you're going out and buying a new manure spreader, it's stuff like that, those costs are going to. So what we assumed is you've got a nice neighbor nearby that is going to spread your manure for you. In other words, they have the capital costs. They're going to charge you. I put $6 per ton to do that. In other words, you're going to get it loaded in there. They're going to go out and spread it. That will decrease your cost versus if you had all that equipment to do it yourself on a small operation. If you have a big operation, you use it enough, it may pay out. But for a small operation, let's assume that you can have that hired done. For the actual loading, so we did assume that you're going to clean out the barn itself. You're going to have a neighbor that's going to spread it for you, but you're going to clean out yourself. Each time it's cleaned out, it's going to take about 25 hours with a skid steer. I'm valuing the cost, the variable cost of that skid steer, $25 an hour, and again, your labor, $18 an hour. So for better or worse, those are kind of the cost assumptions that are going to drive all these scenarios that you see. Any comments, questions on any of that so far? All right, so the next set is basically what I'm labeling logistical type assumptions. So at the top, that would be the capacity of the barn. So for the cow, if it's for mature cows, roughly 30 cows. If you're backgrounding, roughly 60 calves. And then in terms of how long we're going to keep those animals in the barn, so I'm going to show you one scenario that's going to be cow-calf confinement year-round, 365 days. So that, and then another one where it's typically just for the winter, so 120 days. Then with the backgrounding, we're going to assume 3 turns. In other words, you're going to have 3 sets, but we're going to keep each set roughly 110 days, and that gives you time to clean out the barn, get new ones, and all that. Let's see. So essentially, not that you need to know this, but the effective animals would be how many animals actually move through that barn per year. So with the cows, it's just going to be 30, right? Whether they're year-round or 120 days. But with the calves, you essentially have 60 calves each at one time. You're running 3 turns, so 60 times 3 is essentially 180 effective animals going through there. And you'll see that makes a big difference in dropping the cost, overall cost per animal, because you're running so many more animals through that facility. In terms of bedding, for mature cow, about 17.5 pounds per day on average, and for the calves, 8.5 pounds of bedding per day on average. In terms of cleanouts, with the year-round confinement for the cow herd, twice a year, for just the winter cow herd, 1 time a year, and then for backgrounding 3 times. And so those are really all the assumptions we're making, and then all the scenarios that you're going to see are driven by those, and then changes that I will tell you about. Again, any questions? So you all ready for the results then? Some of you may not want to see this, by the way. They look ugly in some cases. So let me make a few comments here. So originally, we all wanted all the bells and whistles. So in other words, I'll show you all the bells. So originally, we were going to put in this barn until it looked really bad how much it was going to cost. So we took those out. We were going to have this real nice bale processor to chip all this stuff up. Until we saw what it's going to cost us, we threw that out. We also tried a manure spreader, brand new manure spreader, until we figured out how much that's going to cost us, and we got rid of that. So just for in other words, this is bare bones, right? You could add a lot more than what we're going to show you here. And the point we're trying to get at is be very careful about what you have in especially a small operation. All right, so we'll go through scenario by scenario. This is the year-round cow-calf one. I will go through this first one slowly, just show you each cost in case you have questions. After we do that for the first one, I'll basically show you the results. Is that okay? So pay attention to this one. If you have questions, ask it. Because after this, to get through all the scenarios, I'm going to go fairly quick. But I'll go through this first one fairly detailed. All right, now, so by the way, this column right here will be the overall cost for the entire facility for that year. The column on the far right will be on a per animal basis. And I'll try to give you context in terms of what that cost is on a per animal basis at the very end for a cow-calf operation. In terms of we'll try to insert that into the overall cow-calf budget to see how it looks. So those are the 2 columns. On the left, obviously, are the various types of costs. So we'll go through each one individually. So barn depreciation, again, this is assuming it's half cost shared. By the way, one thing, I thought about this assumption a number of times in terms of changing it. I didn't, but I would argue you're building a facility that you expect to use for 30 years. What are the chances it's going to actually get used for 30 years? Some people it will, but I would bet that most barns that are built for this purpose are not going to end up being used for 30 years. So in other words, if that was 15 instead of 30 years, what would that depreciation be? It would be double, right? So just keep that in mind. Interest, again, this is at 4%. So basically about 1,000 in depreciation, 1,000 interest, just rough numbers. Now notice the next two are other depreciation, other interest. Those are going to be zero because all those bells and whistles we threw out, we didn't include. But let me back up. But I will put some of that in at the very end. Now we'll get to the bedding first, the material, then the labor, tractor costs, the barn clean out, the manure spreading, all that. So we'll go through that slowly. So there's the bedding cost. Again, this would be for 30 cows year round. So close to $6,000 or about $190 per cow per year. The tractor costs and labor cost would be about $2,000. The clean out cost, this is essentially you're hiring it done, about $2,100. Spreading that manure, another $2,000. Now the manure value, that is negative. In other words, it's a value, not a cost. That's why it's in brackets. So that's about $8,000 with those assumptions. Utilities, that we're not using a fan, so it's not that high, just $150 a year. By the way, this next one is something to consider. So again, I don't have much experience. I've only actually visited one farm that I went through detail. It was a composted bedded pack barn. This was a couple years ago. But I went through basically what we're looking at in detail. And I was shocked when he told me, he said, oh yeah, there's one cost I didn't think about when I built this. Guess what that was? That increase in farm insurance. And I'm showing $100 or $300. I can tell you his was 3 times that. I don't know why. It didn't make any sense to me. But I would get a quote from your insurance company to find out what that is going to cost you, because it's not going to be zero. It's not going to be anything close to zero. Other miscellaneous costs with repairs and other miscellaneous costs, $450, something like that. So if we add them all up, the total per year is about $7,000. On a per cow basis, it's well over $200. Now we will come back to that, but any guesses for a year-round operation? Maybe what number should we keep that under? Do you think that's reasonable? Can you make that work? Any idea? No one has an idea? Let me say you better have a real good idea if you're thinking about building that, what will work. So let me just say right now, I will come back and give context to it, but let me say that is nowhere close to working for a cow-calf operation. Might work when calves are at $250 a pound, but you better not count on selling calves for $250 a pound over an entire cattle cycle. You better use something reasonable. And anything I put reasonable, that's not even going to come close to working. But we will come back at the very end to give context to that, and hopefully you can decide that on your own. All right, any questions here? So that is the base scenario for a year-round cow-calf confinement operation. Jeff?
That's not compost bed pack, that's deep stack adding bedding on top, right?
I don't know, you and Morgan get, so what do you, yes, this is not a composted bed, this is a deep stack, just like we've been talking about, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, we should have, yeah. All these are the same, the deep bedded, what Morgan was showing. Good question. Other questions? All right, the next scenario is going to essentially be the 100, so just wintering the cows for about 120 days on average. So again, I'm not going to go through line by line because we'll be here forever, but you've got the details in your handout. I'll point out a few major, and this advancer is not working well. I've got to click it like 5 times. So our cost per animal went down quite a bit, but obviously the reason being what? They're there a third of the time, roughly. Now, the cost is, so what did we have for the year-round 240? So why is this not 1/3 of the year-round? This is to help you understand what's going on here. So the cattle are only in there 1/3 of the time. Why is that cost not 1/3 of what we just looked at? Because what? The cost of the barn, the depreciation interest, is the same regardless of how long we keep them there, 1 day or 365s, right? So in other words, that cost in the first example is being divided by a whole lot longer, right? And that's exactly what's going on. All right, so no questions on this? All right, so the next one is a backgrounding scenario. So this is where we have 3 groups of cattle moving through here per year, roughly 110 days, something like that. Let me back up here. So does this look reasonable? For having cattle in there for the wintertime, does anyone here think that's going to work for a cow-calf operation? I'm not sure. Adam, if you cost share this, can they store equipment in that barn for the rest of the year? Legally, no. So I don't know, we could have picnics, do lots of stuff to make it work. Any guesses, will that work for a cow-calf operation? Won't even come close. Again, at the very end, we'll give context for it, though. If I had to throw a number up here, if we were getting around $50 and under, it might work. But I would say we're probably close to 3 times the cost of making it work. Now, we'll change some assumptions here in a minute, but it's still not going to get there. So here's the backgrounding. We're at $44 per calf. I don't know. Now, I used to stocker. I finish cattle now, so it's hard, and I've never background in terms of running through the winter on commodity feed, so I can't tell you for sure. All I know is that would be a big chunk of the margin. But if you buy if that allows you to buy enough calves cheap in the fall, yeah, it might work. I think, do we have people that are doing that right now? Will that work for $44? Probably might if you can buy them. If it allows you to buy them at a time of year that you might not otherwise, maybe. The calves I buy in the fall that go onto my farm, I buy them a lot cheaper on average than the ones in the spring. So it may, and I do not know. I'm saying you're going to have to answer that for yourself. But to me, that looks a whole lot more feasible than the other 2 cow-calf scenarios, for sure. So any questions there? All right. So what I'm doing here is just to show you why this one maybe looks decent. So we're running 3 groups of calves through this, right, to get down that cost. What if we're only running 1 group of calves through there? Now, Jonathan, will that work for a backgrounder? I think the answer is no. Even I know that. That ain't going to work for a backgrounding operation. So that's why. So, kind of the same question. So the cost there is $44 per animal. The only change here is it's 1 turn rather than 3. But why isn't that? It's a little over twice, but it's not 3 times the cost. And again, because there's some costs that don't change regardless if you have 4 or 1. Let's see, cow-calf year-round confinement. Okay, so all I did here is we're going back to the year-round confinement, the cow 365, but I'm taking off the cost share. So in other words, there's no free lunch here. You've got to pay that whole cost. So it was, at $240 some? So we've gone up by about $60 per cow. Obviously going the wrong direction. If we do that same thing with the winter cow-calf, it bumps it up to over $200 now. We do the same thing with the backgrounding 3 turns. It's up to $56. I don't know, Jonathan, I'm pretty sure that is not going to, or it's getting to the point where it's going to be real hard to make that work, right? Again, I don't know. I'm just, you can everyone here that does this can kind of make their own decision. But the main thing is, and we will change some of these costs, but if nothing else, what I want you to do is look at each one of these costs, adjust it. In other words, if you think that bedding cost should come down or up, if you think the manure value should be up, as an example, we can do this on the fly, by the way. Let's say you think my bedding material cost is, I don't know, 1/3 too high. What's an easy way you can adjust this? The bedding material is about, $30 an animal? So if I'm 1/3 too high, you can easily do what? Subtract about $10 per animal off that, right? So just in round numbers, that's how you can kind of change some of these. All right, so we're back to the cow-calf with no cost share. That's $304. And what am I going to do now? Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Oh, this advancer is going to drive me crazy. All right, so what I want you to do is, what costs are the big, or not costs, what impacts whether this is going to work the most? Out of all those costs, which ones are the biggest? Or values? Maybe those 2? So the bedding cost and the manure value, right? In other words, a small change in those will have a bigger determination on whether it works versus any other. So all I'm going to do now is change those, and obviously since nothing to me is working with the cow-calf, I'm going to make them both favorable. In other words, I'm going to drop the bedding cost by half. I'm going to drop that bedding material cost by half, and I'm going to increase manure value by 50%. Let's see what it looks like once I do that. So we're at 304. Where are we when we, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So bedding costs goes down by 1/3, manure value goes up by 50%. That's what I did. So in other words, instead of $60 a ton bedding cost, it's going to be $40 a ton bedding cost. All right, so we were at 304. Now we're down to 105. So, but those were with some pretty heroic assumptions there. Would 105 work? I'll let you decide at the very end. I'll give you context so you can make that decision. It's better, obviously. Will it work? I don't know. We can answer that later on. This is where we were with the cow-calf, and I'm going to do the same thing. Basically, I'm going to increase the manure value by 50%, and the bedding cost is going to drop by 1/3. So we were at 209. We're now down to 144. So it looked a lot better. Why did it look a lot better, or why did that change look a lot better on the year-round versus the winter only? There's a very logical reason for it. Which of those scenarios, here we only have them in there for 1/3 of the time. In other words, the manure values, multiply that 50% by 3. Here we only have them in there for 1/3 of the time. So that's what's driving most of that. And here's the backgrounding. That's where we were, $56 with no cost share. If we do that, use those same assumptions, so increase manure value by 50%, drop the bedding cost by 1/3. Where are we at? This slide advance is going to... I should just stand up there. Maybe so. Maybe I'm too far away. That's it. Wow. This guy is a genius. He deserves a raise. Do we have any administrators in here tonight? No administrators. No, forget that. So it was, let me back up, 56. It drops it to 26. So it's looking good. Jonathan, same question. Would that work? If it allows you to buy cheaper calves in the fall, yeah, I think that would work. And by the way, there are probably some, I'm not going to say cost, some other advantages to the system that we're probably not measuring. So Jeff, if I ask you, if we have the same calves in this barn versus out in a mud hole, will our feed costs go down a little bit?
Absolutely.
Probably. So we didn't put everything in here. So my guess is $26. A lot of that would be used up by some of those advantages, would be my guess. But not 100. Is, you know, that cow calf isn't going to go from 209 down to magically 50 with those. Here's the year-round confinement. And what am I doing here? Oh, this is the fun one. Okay, so this is the year-round cow-calf 304. Now we're going to throw the bells and whistles in. We're going to have our own bale processor, and we're going to have fans in there to dry everything out nicely. So we were at 304.
Greg, the bale processor is only for bedding, right?
Correct. Yeah. All right, we're up almost $500 an animal. Folks, there are some years, not now, but there's some years that your average revenue per cow adjusted for your weaning rate isn't going to even cover that. And my guess is some people have seen that in the last 4 or 5 years. All right, so now I'm going to give you context. So this was a few years ago when I had this slide, but we will keep increasing the price until we have something that you're comfortable with. So let's say on average, this would be for an average steer heifer, so this would be for a cow-calf operation. Let's say that we have an average weaning weight of 550 pounds for steer heifer mix, and let's say that we're expecting to sell that for $1.50. So again, not now, but years ago. By the way, I think I was only 3 years ago when I pulled this slide from what we do every year. That's essentially what we're getting at the time. So revenue would be $825 if we have an 85% weaning rate, or in other words, lose 15% of the calves. That's what we're losing on that, so it drops it down to effective revenue to about $700. So let's put some context to that. So, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but and I'm not showing you, but this was 3 years ago. I promise you, and this was like one of the best case scenarios we could come up with. But at that time, if you're doing everything right in terms of keeping your costs down, didn't have a lot of new machinery, were doing things very efficiently, your cash cost might be around $440 per cow. I can promise you today that probably gets bumped up at least $30, $40. And that's, again, if you're doing everything right. And then depreciation interest, that would be on equipment, buildings, facilities, stuff like that, not the confinement building, but everything else. This is a very low number, but we just threw it in there to get people started, around $150. And I've got to keep standing closer here. Most people, that's going to be probably closer to $200, and a lot of people, it's going to be close to $300. So if we subtract those out, and I'll give context, that the return to your land and labor would be about $110. Now, what do I mean by return to land and labor? So in other words, you're not in those costs, we don't have your labor, right? So in other words, with that bottom, that's a gross return, and that's got to compensate you for your labor. It's also got to compensate you for the land that you have on that farm. Now, if you're in a confinement operation, you won't have that, and we can subtract that out. So in other words, with a confinement operation, that would just be a return to your labor, but we still need to now subtract off what? The cost of that facility, right? And actually, one more thing that we will get to. Now, hopefully, we have better price than that long run. But so again, think of this as not your price to this year, but think of this over 10 years. What do you expect for calf prices? I think that's actually a pretty good 10-year calf price, $1.75. So in that situation, we subtract out that same $440 cash cost, $150 for depreciation equipment, and we get, that's $2. This is still going nuts. We get about $230. That, again, if it's a confinement operation, we get rid of the land, it's returned to labor, but we still need to subtract out what? Those confinement costs, which we'll come right back to. So hold on. And I'm throwing $2. I don't think that's a realistic long-term average, but if you do, you can use that slide. So that really, I should call that gross return or return to land labor is $345, and then we've got to subtract out from there. So kind of final stage in giving context. So we will start, so if you're going from kind of a typical cow-calf operation to a total confinement, 365 days, what big costs are you going to have that we haven't talked about yet? Feed, specifically what? Hey, in other words, if you're going from 120-day feeding in the wintertime to 365, you think you're going to have a little bit higher hay cost? So let's estimate that now. So essentially that would be 245 days of extra feeding, correct? If my math is right. Let's say we're feeding on average 40 pounds of hay per day. That would make it about 10,000 pounds. We divide that by 2,000 pounds just to make tonnage. It gives us 4.9 tons of hay. You can put in whatever price you think is realistic, and I'm putting $70 a ton, and that would include delivery if you're buying it. And I would say that is not it's a fairly conservative price. If we multiply that through, it's about $340 per cow. That would be an added cost, right? That you have to subtract out from that net return to land and labor. So let's look at that. So this is with $2 calves. So that net return to land and labor is $345. So if we're in a confinement situation, 365, what do we now need to subtract from that? Two things. First is what? What we just covered, right? The feed cost. Let's take that out. What else do we have to now subtract out? All those assumptions that we started with, which I gave you a few different assumptions, right? The best case for a cow-calf was what? The very best, and that's if we assume manure was twice, was what, $100 and some, but kind of the average, 150, 125, whatever you pick which one, it doesn't matter because guess what? Before I even put that, where are we at right here? Before we even put whatever costs with the confinement, we're at what? We're at zero. So you've already got to, you essentially work for free the whole winter or the whole year, and to add, we need to do what? We need to subtract some more off. So you can pick that. So in other words, your return to your labor is now what? Minus $240 per cow, or free, or whatever scenario you want to pick. Do I need to belabor this? So I don't know, you all tell me, what am I doing wrong here? I can't find a scenario this comes close to working. I can show you a few more. Here's $1. By the way, again, this is what calf price? $2. Do you think that's realistic for a 10-year average? Let's bring it down to $1.75. Do you want to see that number? Multiply that by 50 cows, we're at what? We've lost $15,000. Nice. And if Adam cost shares that 50%, we only lost $8,000 or $9,000. So I don't know, I'm really trying to sound positive here, but I haven't been able to do it when I went through all these scenarios. So what am I doing wrong here? I must have thrown something out of whack here because I can't find any scenario that works.
Greg, you're saying with the cow-calf that works?
Yes, we're talking cow-calf. Yes, so backgrounding, I think we have some situations that it can work. But my guess is a good chunk of the people in here are with cow-calves, and if nothing else, I want to make sure that you go into this with eyes wide open. Because I can't find a scenario that even comes close to working, even remotely close to working. So they're doing a bunch of turns. Yeah, so that will make it look better on the background because you have more effective animals through it. But for a cow-calf, for a cow-calf, what am I doing wrong here? You need to ask Morgan that. Morgan, can we stuff more cattle in there? I'm sorry? I'm trying to make sure I understand this. So let me ask you this question. So let's say you had $100,000 that you wanted to invest, and you went to one financial advisor. He said, "Yeah, give me this $100,000. I'll give you $50,000 back in 5 years." The other one said, "I'll give you $75,000 of the original $100,000 back." Which of those would you pick? But the point being is, we're not looking at the best of two bad scenarios. You have a third option. That's what? Don't build.
So there are a few things. We could reduce calf losses. Let's say we moved in confinement. Dr. Van Valen and mentioned we bring our management up. Rather than 15% loss, we bump that to 90. We get 5% more calves. We could make a slight improvement there.
Okay, we're at 270 minus 275 now. Keep going, Jeff.
We could maybe reduce forage waste by 15, 20%.
Minus 250. I'm being generous.
So I'm trying to whittle away.
So that said, let's go back. Let's just talk about the background situation. So yeah, it looks like it may work. So I'm putting you in the ballpark. I can't refine it any more than that. In other words, the assumptions if it's going to work are how much are you able to buy the calves cheaper by having a facility that you can put them in. I can't help you that. If you give me the parameters that you want me to run, I can run those numbers. The problem is we couldn't run 100 different scenarios. In fact, we ran more scenarios than Jeff wanted me to. Sure.
Crop gas is taking all the pasture away. You cannot compete with it. So pasture rent is at a premium. So if you figure 1 acre per calf on an alternative system, you're going to pay 40, 50, 60 bucks to get that pasture rent just to run an alternative system. Now, given the pasture is going to bring you some of your groceries, I get that. But there's got to be some balance there, some give and take. Not all that 40 and 50. That could allow somebody to get in the background in business who may also be a grain farmer, who may also be able to produce silage. You see what I'm saying? The integration of all that is hard to figure, but I think there's some advantages to that.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I didn't say that backgrounding won't work. That's why we're going back and forth. I think it has opportunities. I couldn't really refine it beyond that for this presentation. So other than say it looks like there are opportunities there. Right. I understand. So, and I'm not saying that it's not going to work for backgrounding, but just because barns are going up doesn't mean they're going to work, because I've seen a lot of calf barns go up that I know aren't going to work.
Yeah, there's a lot of old barns in Western that take backgrounding cattle for they're working. Okay.
No, I'm just saying.
On the cow-calf side.
Yeah.
I mean,
My point is just because, I'm not, I'm saying backgrounding it, there are many situations it probably works. But let me be clear, I can't go beyond this tonight. If you want me to run different scenarios, I can do that. Again, I couldn't run every.
Well, I mean, I just felt like we were painting an overall negative picture. On the cow thing looks ugly.
No, I want to be clear.
Yeah.
Cow and backgrounding. Cow looks really ugly. Backgrounding, I don't think I said backgrounding looked ugly. I can run some other snares. You're going to have to tell me what you want me to plug in there. But my gut feeling is if you have a cow herd and you're going to just run your own calves. So again, my email's there. You can give me the parameter. Let me say this, though. I don't background, but I'm guessing if you're buying 3 loads of calves a year, which of those calves is going to be your most profitable? When you buy them when? In the fall, which is exactly when he wants to do what? Put his cow herd in. So it's going to look better than it's not going to look like you're backgrounding 3 because you're putting your cows in when your most profitable backgrounding group is going to go in.